Hello, vinyl lovers, and welcome to another episode of Groovescape. I'm Josh Greenberg, and this episode was recorded at my home studio in Ottawa, Canada. I've had a crazy week, juggling a really busy workload, sick kids at home, nobody testing positive for COVID, thank God. So I'm a little behind on a few episodes that I hoped would be ready by now, but those are going to take a bit more time and patience. But for my faithful subscribers, or for new listeners, please know I've been still spinning a lot of music this week, and so I'm happy to bring you Volume 3 of Groovescape's ongoing series, What's On My Turntable, where I profile 5 outstanding records that I've been listening to nonstop. Now, if you missed Volumes 1 and 2, you can check them out on our YouTube or SoundCloud channels. I'm often asked, what triggers an interest in listening to, say, The Cramps or Herbie Hancock, rather than ELO, Jane's Addiction, or The Smiths. Now, by now you may know that my musical palette is quite broad, so I move from jazz to prog, folk to classic rock, psych to punk, somewhat seamlessly. Is it a particular memory or a general mood that calls for a certain album or artist? Is it the weather? Every time I wake up on a Saturday morning, if it's raining, I just feel the need to listen to Fleet Foxes or Grizzly Bear or Neil Young. Or is it something that I've read? Or something that happened out there in the world that tells me today is a day for the Beastie Boys, or I really need to play some Supertramp? Truth be told, there's never any plan, rhyme, or reason for why I'll take a deep dive into a handful of records over the course of several days. Now, often an album will, kind of find its way onto my radar because I've read a review in one of my favorite magazines or on a music review site, or because an artist gets featured on one of the many podcasts I listen to. In fact, 3 of the albums I'm going to share with you today became objects of intense affection this week because the artists were highlighted on some of my favorite music podcasts. Now, who were those artists? You're about to find out. These are the 5 albums that got a ton of play on my turntable this week. Number 1. So I have been listening to the new Caribou album, Suddenly, a lot over the last several days. Caribou, if you don't know, is the stage name of the recording artist, composer, musician, multiple award winner, Dan Snaith. And Suddenly is his 5th album. Now, Snaith won the prestigious Polaris Music Prize in 2008 for his sophomore LP Andorra, and was shortlisted for the Polaris for both his 3rd album Swim and his 4th LP Our Love. And once again, Caribou is on the Polaris shortlist for Suddenly. And in fact, those awards are going to be announced tonight, perhaps by the time you're watching this episode. And I wouldn't be surprised, actually, if Caribou takes the top prize yet again. Both Swim and Our Love also won the Juno Awards for Best Electronic Album of the Year in 2011 and 2015, respectively. Before he performed as Caribou, Dan Snaith recorded under the stage names Daphne and Manitoba. I don't know the Daphne era music particularly well, but I listened to a lot of Manitoba in the early 2000s. I had some bootleg CDs, and I remember streaming Manitoba music on Snaith's MySpace page. That period in his musical style was abstract, down-tempo, highly experimental. It was really interesting and unique music. Caught the attention of a lot of music industry, high-profile music industry types, including Radiohead's Tom York, who would become a longtime fan of both Manitoba and Caribou. Snaith would go on to perform with Radiohead in a number of shows. Snaith also interestingly enough, holds a PhD in mathematics from Imperial College in London. And the math genes run in the family. His older sister Nina is a world-renowned mathematician who works at University of Bristol. Now, both Nina, who happens to be my age, and Dan, who's a few years younger, attended the same high school that I did in the small town of Dundas, Ontario, about an hour west of Toronto. Now, what sparked my interest in this Caribou Fest this week was an episode of the absolutely terrific podcast Talkhouse. If you've not checked out Talkhouse, definitely do so. It features artists in conversation with one another. And this week's episode paired Snaith with Tame Impala's Kevin Parker in a probing 1-hour conversation that explored a wide range of themes, from their favorite gear to collaboration, touring, the ups and downs of being a solo recording artist. It's a terrific conversation between two of the world's most interesting and accomplished musicians. Now I'm going to play you my favorite song from Suddenly. This is a really groovy R&B hip-hop type of track. It's the 5th song on the album, and it's called Home.
What she pleases, 'cause she's happy on her own, and she picks up all the pieces. She's going home.
Baby, I'm home, I'm home, I'm home.
Yeah, she's going home.
Baby, I'm home, I'm home, I'm home.
So that was Home off Caribou's latest album, Suddenly. It was released in May of 2020. Now, one of the things that I really loved about that conversation between Snaith and Parker was their shared affection for the Swedish psychedelic rock band Dungen. Now, Dungen is spelled Dungen, and Dungen is fronted by the composer and musician Gustav Estes, who, not unlike Parker and Snaith, writes all of the band's music and plays the majority of its instruments on the studio albums. Dungen's debut album, called Dat Het Lugnt, which translates in English to Take It Easy, was released in 2004. And despite the fact that not a single track is sung in English, the album garnered critical international acclaim. It's the musical nature of Estes' voice, which is rich, melodic, unique, that makes the band's sound resonate across linguistic communities. Now, you don't have to understand a single word of Swedish to appreciate how good the voice is and how great this band is. As a Pitchfork reviewer wrote, "If you understand Swedish, you'll get the full meaning of the songs, but if you don't, you'll still get caught up in the striking way that Estes draws out all of those unfamiliar syllables." Now, Dungen has released 8 studio albums and 1 live LP, and the album that I've been listening to nonstop this week is the band's 4th album, appropriately titled 4, which was released in 2008 under the indie label Subliminal Sounds. It's a really interesting record. Showcases 2 very different sonic influences. On the one hand, there's a clear classic rock orientation that draws from the traditions of Black Sabbath, Led Zeppelin, and Jimi Hendrix. Let's listen, for example, to a sample of the album's 4th track on side A. It's called Sam Didict, and it's translated as At the Same Time. That's some pretty heavy shit. Now, while Dungeon's fourth album clearly trades in a classic psychedelic rock tradition, it also showcases the band's ability to combine jazz, prog, folk, and more contemporary psych sounds into a fusion of disparate influences and sonic textures. I'm going to play you now actually a sample from the third track on the album, which comes just before that last one I just played. This song is called Det tar tid, which in English translates to It Takes Time.
På den enda gången bara vi förstår att joy och blicken ljuger aldrig för mig. Så jag vet det tar tid. Jag vill jag med, måste jag gå nu. Tänker snart så kommer ögonblicket. Allting hamnar på sin plats.
I just love how jazzy that track is, and you've got bongos and piano. There's just so many great sounds on that song. That was Det tar tid, It Takes Time, the third song on Dungeon's fourth album, which is also called 4, again, released in 2008. Now, my go-to amplifier in my main listening room is a Pioneer SA9500. This is a beautiful silver vintage piece of hi-fi equipment. Was built in 1975. Sadly, I had to bring it in for service this week, so I had to call up my trusty NAD 3150 from the minor leagues to help fill the void. Now, this NAD is capable of producing some amazingly detailed pinpoint imaging and it has a real kind of clarity of sound. So I asked myself when I brought this out, I hadn't used this amp in a long time, what record should I listen to that will really show off what this little amp can do? I didn't have to think very long, and no question in my mind as to which album that should be. And I chose, and so I've been listening to this record a lot this week, Blur's 2015 release, The Magic Whip. And this, too, is a friggin' outstanding album. This is Blur's 8th studio LP and the first in more than a decade since the band released Think Tank in 2003. The sound engineering on this record is incredible. The album is like just super tonally rich. It's punchy. It's crisp. It's just sounds amazing. The Magic Whip is aptly named after a Chinese brand of firecracker, which makes sense when you learn that Blur recorded much of this record during an unplanned 5-day stayover in Hong Kong, following the cancellation of a series of Far East tour dates in the spring of 2013. Blur's chief songwriter, Damon Albarn, who of course has a super successful solo career among other projects, like Gorillaz, for example. Albarn returned to Hong Kong a year after the songs were tracked, I think it was in November of 2014, to compose the lyrics for the album. And you can also see from the artwork how inspired they were from their time in Asia. Now, longtime fans of Blur are going to enjoy this album for the ways that it captures so many different kind of moments and sounds from the band's nearly 2 decades of music. The opening track is called Lonesome Street, and it's classic Blur with recognizable Graham Coxon guitar riffs, Albarn's staccato lyricism. The song sounds like it could easily have been lifted from the band's heyday in the 1990s, and just given a bit of a makeover with some modern electronic overdubs. That's a great song. The first single to come from that album was called Go Out, and it's awesome too. If you love Coxon's guitar work, this is going to be your album highlight for sure. I'm not going to play you either of those songs. Definitely want to check them out on your own, but I am going to play you a more kind of reggae-inspired track. It's called Ghost Ship. And this song is built around some very smooth Alex James bass lines. It's got a real slow burner of a chorus. It's super funky. It's mellow. It's breezy. Lyrically, it evokes the place where the song was written and recorded. Just a kind of quote from the chorus, "Till I ever hold you out there again, will you be mine? 'Cause I'm on a ghost ship, drowning my heart in Hong Kong. It's the last ride boarding here tonight. Out in the bay, I'll need a lantern in you to shine out bright rays." This is Ghost Ship.
I remember flashbacks lighting up Magic Whip. 8 o'clock, Kowloon and Tina's handle it. Though I don't seem as I had to view 11 seconds ago. I didn't send you, so you will never know. I got away for a little while, but then it came back much harder. Swinging on the cape over Tripoli, climbing down a ghostly wine in a battery. That light in your eyes I search for religiously, but when it's not there, oh Lord, it's hurting me. I got away for a little while, but then it came back much harder. Till I ever hold you out there again, will you be mine? 'Cause I'm
So that is Ghost Ship by Blur off its 2015 album, The Magic Whip. Now, there are few bands that evoke memories of my teenage years quite like INXS. I distinctly remember when Listen Like Thieves came out in 1985. I was in Florida with my dad, and the album's opening track, What You Need, was getting constant radio play. Every time I listen to this song now, I can still smell the South Florida ocean air. Windows down on the rental car, hair blowing in the breeze, the sun warming my pale northern skin. This album powers some deeply important personal memories. Now, Listen Like Thieves, the band's fifth studio album, was released 35 years ago, this last Wednesday, October 14th. Now, I don't know about you, but that makes me feel super old. That album was recorded over a 3-month period in Australia with famed producer Chris Thomas, best known for his work with the Sex Pistols, Roxy Music, Pretenders, and Elton John, until he worked with INXS. Now, Listen Like Thieves was a big breakthrough record for the band, a pivotal career-turning album, or what Pitchfork magazine calls a Verge album. And a Verge album is a mid-career highlight where a fully formed, fully confident band finds itself at the precipice of something much bigger and maybe just a little bit beyond their control. What You Need was the band's first top 5 single in the US, and as the story goes, was recorded on the last day of the band's studio session as they were hurrying to find the perfect single. The producer, Chris Thomas, felt the album was strong but lacked a distinctive track that would garner intensive radio play. And so, born from the ashes of a demo track called simply Funk Song Number 13, lead singer and lyricist Michael Hutchence, and multi-instrumentalist Andrew Ferris crafted this monster single out of what was initially just a catchy guitar riff on a demo tape. And the rest, as they say, was history. INXS had hit the big time, big time.
You need, ooh, that's why. Because what you need, I think what you need.
I do love that song, and when I'm done recording this episode, I think I'm going to go and play the whole thing all over again. So that was What You Need by INXS off their 5th studio album, Listen Like Thieves, released 35 years ago last week. We come now to the 5th and final album that I've been listening to a lot this week. Anyway, this is a quick question for you. How many of you have heard of William Onyeabor? Now, little is actually known about Onyeabor, the Nigerian electro-funk musician who was huge in his home country in the 1970s and 80s, and has since become a favorite of DJs, crate diggers, and artists all over the world. Both Blur's Damon Albarn and Dan Snaith both identify Onyeabor as a huge influence. Mint copies of original pressings of his early albums sell for as much as $250 on online collectors marketplace. Now, I hadn't even heard of Onyeabor until I started reading David Sax's 2016 book, The Revenge of Analog. I started reading this last summer and was rereading the introduction recently, in fact. And it's a great book. Sachs describes in the introduction how having so much digital music available at the flick of a finger may be easy and convenient, but it really eliminates the kind of fun and discovery that is so fundamental. It's so essential to the joy of listening to music. Now, for Sachs, vinyl offers a qualitatively different sensorial experience that's more authentic, more social than streaming music from your favorite digital platform. I'll quote from the book. He says, "So I found myself purchasing records whenever I could. I began by digging through the discount bins at June Records for old jazz and soul albums, but was very soon buying freshly pressed, newly released records by bands and artists I learned about by actually talking to June's staff." Now, this sounds very familiar, and I think really captures quite nicely the highly social nature of record collecting and the really important kind of curatorial role in many ways that independent record stores play in shaping a community's local vinyl scene. Now, Sachs continues, "Often, if something was playing on the turntable at the shop, I'd pick it up. The harmonic guitar rock debut from local band Always, or a fresh compilation from Nigerian psych disco hermit William Onyeabor." A Nigerian psych disco hermit. That sounded really cool. So who was this Onyeabor fellow, I wondered. Now, ironically, given Sachs's thesis about the kind of empty experience of listening to digital music, I opened Spotify. I pulled up an Onyeabor set list, and I was absolutely mesmerized. This was great fucking music. So I immediately ordered a copy of the 2014 anthology, Who is William Onyeabor? This is a double album with some really fascinating liner notes about this highly enigmatic musician who just disappeared from the music world suddenly, and now reportedly lives in a hidden palace in the woods of eastern Nigeria. Now, Onyeabor has been described as Nigeria's answer to synth pop and new wave, a progressive adventurer who wielded a synthesizer like a musical passport. So why, when he was at the peak of his musical prowess in the 1980s, did he just stop performing and recording? Why, when his music was rediscovered decades later, was he reportedly opposed to having it released? Now, it's a story that absolutely fascinates me. I don't know the answers to those questions yet. I'm hoping to learn more about this master of Afro-funk and jazz synth. I'm going to play you the opening track on side A of the Onyeabor anthology. It's a song called Body and Soul. So that does it for Volume 3 of Groovescape's weekly series, What's On My Turntable. I hope you enjoyed the music that I played for you today on this episode. I'll be back again soon with another episode, and until then, enjoy your music, be good to each other, and stay safe.
Let her come and dance your troubles away.